First of all, good morning. My name's Neil Fedham. Just a bit of background to myself. I started off quite unbelievably 30 years ago. Some credit the other day. 30 years ago in the Japanese automotive industry. So I started off at Nissan Cars, where lean was sort of like being introduced, probably for the first time into the UK, going back 30 years ago. And at the time it was seen as quite a revolutionary thing. You know, we'd been producing cars the way we produced them probably since the 1900s, mass production. And then all of a sudden the Japanese came along and they started to talk about lean manufacturing. At the time, we didn't even think that lean would work in the UK. We thought it was a Japanese cultural thing, and it would never work in a British culture. It was heavily unionised and was very much all about volume manufacturing at the time, and was synonymous with high costs, very low, poor quality, a lot of recalls, high levels of stock, sat in fields, rusting away. If you remember how they used to sell vehicles, they used to basically make it, stick it in a field, and then you'd have a salesman that was pressurised that would sell you this vehicle from stock, basically. And what the Japanese came along with this concept of just in time, and basically the idea that you'd go into a showroom, you'd specify exactly what you required, and between 6 and 8 weeks later, this vehicle would be produced and be sat there waiting for you to pick it up, and it'd be customised to your exact specification. So if you look at the number of options now that you have on a vehicle, in terms of trim and audio and the different types of levels of engines, it's gone absolutely astronomical. So you've gone from this scenario whereby it was mass produced, you were given what was in stock, to this point where you've got mass customisation effectively. So it was quite a big cultural change for the UK. You can imagine, just on the eve of probably one of the biggest financial recessions that we'd seen, you can imagine how that went down. But basically what I'd started to see over the years was more and more non-manufacturing companies asking for help from a lean perspective. So they were, the challenges we'd seen in manufacturing in terms of reducing lead times and lowering costs and skill shortages applied basically to any business. So the business was set up 10 years ago predominantly to focus on the non-manufacturing sector. And we worked with around about 140 horticulture companies during that period, really looking at what we've described. Lead time became the big thing. And just I've actually summarised, going back, this was some of the challenges I think that businesses were seeing. Price competition, so price pressure from the competition. These are reasons why people wanted to implement lean within the businesses. Customers want more options and more variety. So I think one of the things that people had talked about in times gone by, the number of options, look at the automotive industry, the amount of options that were available to you was quite low, whereas nowadays it's a mass amount of options that you've got available to you, but customers aren't willing to pay for that price increase. They want things at the same price as what you can basically buy a mass-produced vehicle. Lead time, so people want things in shorter and shorter lead time than ever before. So a lot of the companies that we work with, it was all about how can we reduce down the amount of lead time. Smaller order quantities, so we ended up doing a lot of work in retail. So predominantly we did a lot of work for John Lewis. And one of the things that we found is buyers don't want to buy big quantities anymore. They want to buy smaller and smaller quantities because they don't want to take the risk. They don't want to take the risk on buying something, having lots and lots of stock at the retail side of things. What they want to do is order smaller quantities but order it more frequently. But that puts pressure on businesses and supply chain. If you're constantly having to change over and increase the amount of variety you've got within your business, costs go up through the roof. Costs can go up through the roof. But the customer won't take that cost on. You can't then charge a premium to customers for that. So against that backdrop of variety and lead time increases, you've got a situation where economic pressures don't allow you to pass those costs on to the end customer. Constant need to introduce new products. You can't carry on doing things the same way as what you've always done. You've got to introduce new innovative ways of doing things. Increased levels of service, so it wasn't just about the product anymore. It was all about the level of service. We do a lot of work in the tomato sector, and they now employ people that go into the retail space, and they're doing research on taste for the likes of Waitrose. So not only do they just sell tomatoes, they actually go along to Waitrose and saying, look, these are the trends that we're seeing in terms of taste in consumers with tomatoes. So, you know, rather than just providing a product, they've had to build in lots and lots of processes that talk about how they provide this level of service to the likes of Waitrose that enables them to differentiate themselves on something else that isn't just price or cost. Constant need to reduce down stock, especially after the crash that we had back in 2009. Cash became very, very tight. So a lot of businesses that were coming to us, well, how can we reduce down the levels of stock that we've got within the business? We can't borrow a way out of this problem. So we had to look at things like just in time. How can we minimise the amount of stuff and materials that we buy in order to free up as much cash as we've potentially got? And then the one more and more these days has been skill shortages. So we can't recruit a way out of the problem. We need to maximise the amount of skills and the level of resource that we've got available to us to be able to carry out and satisfy the customer orders that we've got. And that, particularly in the last year, that's been the biggest reason why people have been coming to us and saying, look, how can we apply lean? How can we improve productivity so we can maximise the skills and the resources we've got available to us? And just to give you, going back one slide, and this is the list of companies that we work with over the years. This is a selection. So it's surprising what started off as a manufacturing technique now has been applied to a whole range of industries. And at the moment now, I'd say probably for the last 4 years, there's 10 of us in the business, but for the last 4 years I've been focusing on the Foreign Office, the Home Office and the Ministry of Defence. So most of my work now is done in Westminster in central government, looking at how can we apply these techniques to central government so we can maximise what we can achieve with limited amount of resources that we've got within central government. So it really has spread like wildfire as this concept called lean. I think in some respects, the last recession taught us a lot about business. And do you remember a term, I don't know if you heard a term in the press, was called zombie companies? Yeah, basically a zombie company is something that will operate on very, very low margins. What will happen is they'll creep along, not much or a great deal will change, and then something will change in the environment and these zombie companies go out of business. And the ones that spring to my mind was Woolworths. Look what happened with Woolworths. I mean, basically the only thing that differentiated themselves was pick and mix and CDs. That was, when you boil down the business model, that's the only thing that they really had that actually differentiated them as a business. And what happened is a business that just couldn't change. It got stuck on this do-nothing line. Is that a laser pointer? It is brilliant. So you get stuck on this do-nothing line, you don't do anything, and a result of which you get a big volatility comes along, whether that be an economic change or a change within the marketplace, and that business goes under. I think most people got that if you're in decline, if your profits are dropping, if your sales are dropping, you're going to be faced with some difficult decisions at some point. I think what the last recession taught us, if we're a zombie company, if we're not doing any change at all, we're going to be faced with some difficult decisions because competition's going to come along or a change is going to come along, and at that point we're going to have to do something about it. So the theory and the concept behind lean is that what you do is you get your business on this trajectory. You get everybody within the business, from management all the way through to the operational level, you get everybody thinking about and challenging, is this the best way of doing things? Is there a better way of doing it? Where can we shade off 5 seconds or 10 seconds here on an operation in order to get this what we call continuous improvement or gradual improvements? And that's what you're trying to do within the business. You're trying to do that so it mitigates the impact of competition, but also enables the business to change with volatility within the marketplace. Do you remember when Kodak went under? About the same time as the recession kicked off. So Kodak, their business model was all about producing photography films. And apparently everybody in the business, apparently it was like the slowest car crash ever. Everyone knew they were going to go out of business. They knew that everyone was going digital, that films was going to die. But there was no energy and there was no mechanisms within the business to allow them to change. So they just knew it was going to happen. And that's the problem you sometimes get with businesses, because they're not used to change. They're not used to doing continuous improvement. When they have to change, when this gap opens up between what the competition are doing and what they're doing, they find it very, very difficult to adapt to that. And as a result of which, they either force to change through it, it's a very, very difficult period, or inevitable happens and the business goes under. So that's the thinking, that's the theory behind lean, is how can we get everybody within the business challenging the way we do things and challenging the norm and thinking about what we can do to improve things. And this is where lean came into it. This is where a lot of the lean principles, and this is why I think it's been so successful over the years. This is the theory behind lean and getting everybody in the business to challenge the status quo and to challenge the way we do things. And there's 5 basic principles that you come across. The first thing you've got to do is understand what is it the end user wants. So what is it the end customer wants from this process? So what is the thing they're willing to pay for? So what's the value that we're trying to drive? Once you understand the value, the next thing you have to understand is the value stream. So what are the processes and the mechanisms that you've got for delivering value through to the end customer? Once you understand the value stream, and one of the techniques that we use is a technique called process mapping. Once you understand the value stream, what you have to understand is what are all the wastes that you've got within that value stream that stop the value flowing through to the end customer. Because whenever you've got waste, whenever you've got delays, whenever you've got overproduction or overprocessing or inventory, whatever that waste is, that actually stops the flow of value getting through to the end customer. So the theory is if we eliminate the waste, what that allows us to do is to improve the flow. By improving the flow, we can reduce down lead times, and what we can do as well at the same time is improve productivity. So that's the theory behind the flow idea. The theory behind pull is just in time. So how do we deliver what the customer wants when the customer wants it? So whereas before in the past, talk about going back to automotive, the idea was push. So that was the opposite to pull is push. We'd produce the stock, we'd have it sat there waiting for the customer, and then we'd push it onto the end customer whether they wanted it or not. The idea of pull is you understand what the end customer wants and you manufacture it or you produce it exactly to those customer requirements and you deliver it exactly at the point that the customer requires it. That's the theory of pulling the value through rather than pushing the value through. And some of the techniques we'll use as part of today are things like Kanban you'll come across. So it's still, a lot of the lean manufacturing, because of its origins are Japanese, it still carries across a lot of the Japanese terminology that reflects its origins. And then the last principle is the theory of perfection, the continuous improvement. So once you've got the operation working the way you want it to work, you've got to keep it there. And you've got to stay in front of the competition. So how do you get everybody doing this thing I was talking about earlier, challenging the way you do things and think about how can you shade off little bits of time here and there, knowing that once that's aggregated, it'll actually make quite a big difference within the operation. And that's the technique we use, continuous improvement. Japanese word for it is Kaizen. Kai means change, Zen means for the good or for the better. So Kaizen means change for the good or change for the better. Lots and lots of small improvements actually mounts up to quite a big difference. And that's the theory, again, going back to this, is how can you get everybody within the business thinking about these small improvements and these small gains. We did some work for Southampton Football Club going back a few years ago, and it was applying lean to Southampton Football Club. And I don't know if you know, Southampton punch well above the finances got available to them. And if you look at the players they've sold over the years, it's tremendous. If you look at Gareth Bale and the like, Luana that went to Liverpool, the amount of talent they've produced over the years is astronomical. And that's their business model. Their business model is, we can never compete on transfers. What we'll do is grow our own. So they've got a fantastic academy. And they literally wanted to apply lean to the academy so they could actually think about how could they get these marginal gains and get lots and lots of improvements. So they could bring these youngsters through and they could actually get them to the point where they were competing at the highest game they possibly can. Talking about skill shortages, they couldn't go out into the transfer market and compete with the likes of Man United or Tottenham and those teams. They had to grow their own and had to invest within their own skills base. And they've done extremely well on that particular business model. But it was really interesting, the level of detail they thought about. So they try to minimise the number of injuries they have. So they teach all the youngsters yoga. So as soon as they come into the academy, one of the first things they teach them is yoga. And they spend a lot of time stretching to reduce down the number of soft muscle injuries. And they've actually shown stats now that the Southampton players that have come through the academy actually carry on playing football for longer in their careers than a lot of other professionals. And that's what they've put it down to. And it's this thinking that they've got now within the club of maximising every single little bit of talent they possibly can do within the operation. So, just going into a little bit more detail, the bit I'm going to pick up on now is something called 7 ways. Value is defined as something that the customer is willing to pay for, or a service that the customer is willing to pay for. So it's either a product or a service. Anything else we classify as non-value add, or as one of the 7 ways. And that's where the terminology lean comes from. Lean really talks about a process that hasn't got much waste within that process itself. We've eliminated as much waste as we possibly can do to reduce down lead times and improve productivity. And the thinking is, if you actually analyse, when you do process mapping, so I'll show you some pictures in a minute where we've process mapped using post-it notes all the way across a big wall. And when you actually start to analyse all the activities within that process, only about 5% of them will actually do something that truly adds value in the eyes of the end customer. The vast majority of operations within a process, 95% typically, are actually things like this. So the 7 waste basically. So we've got things like waiting and delays, movement of people, excess production, over-processing, so lots of inspection and rework, defects from suppliers, having to deal with all that coming in, transportation, so physically moving things around the operation of stock, so the amount of stock that's carried within the business. And that's what you're trying to do with Lean. We're focusing on reducing that 95%, and what that does, hopefully, is create more capacity to do more of the value-add activities. So you don't focus in, traditionally where we used to do things in the UK manufacturing, we'd focus on the value-add, we'd do things like time study. So we'd stand behind somebody with a stopwatch, and we say, right, I want you to double the rate at which you add value. What do you think the impact of that was within UK manufacturing? Exactly. So what it forces you to do is produce more regardless of what the end quality is. Yeah, so qualities, it gets impacted upon. You can imagine what that has to morale, so the amount of disputes that we used to potentially have. And what it also does, it forces you to overproduce. So you produce at a rate that's quicker than what your consumer can consume those products at. So the 3 things we were synonymous for in UK manufacturing was low quality, lots of industrial disputes, and high excess stock within the business. And a lot of it was down to the fact we focused in on how can we improve the rate of value add. Whereas what Lean was all about and what the Japanese were all about, what are all the things that stop an individual adding value? So I'm going to go along to this individual. I'm going to analyse what this individual's doing. I'm going to think about all the things that stop him adding value. I'm going to design everything around this individual to help him increase, reduce down and minimise the amount of waste to help him increase the amount of value they add within the operation. Can you see the difference between the 2 approaches? So what you tended to get is the management team working alongside the operations and working together to think about what they could do to reduce down that waste, because nobody enjoys doing that. You know, everyone comes into their jobs and into their work to add value. Nobody comes in to do waste, and that's the bit that causes a lot of frustration within people's lives, within the working environment. So by focusing on the non-value add, it improved it from a business point of view, because lead time and productivity improved, but it also improved it from an operational point of view for the people that work within that business, because it reduced down the amount of frustrations that they were having. So straight away, rather than having this conflict that you potentially used to have, what you've ended up with a situation there where you've got the management team and the operators working together. And that maximised the amount of skills within the environment. So quite often you see 7 waste plus 1. The plus 1 is skills. It's actually recognising that by employing people to do all this, we're not maximising the amount of skills and what people are good at. You know, what people are good at is adding value. So the plus 1 is acknowledging that fact. It's acknowledging the fact that we're not getting the best out of individuals by employing them to do this waste. So by eliminating all this waste, we increase the amount of value add and we improve the flow. Going back to what I talked about earlier about the flow. So you improve the flow of the product, which reduces down your lead time. Right, so this is that process mapping side of things. This is one we did with B&Q. Going back into the days of horticulture, this was going back to one of the really poor summers. I think it was 2010. It was a particularly nasty summer in 2010 where it rained quite a long way into the season itself. And what was happening was B&Q weren't having a particularly good season, so they cut down all their orders with the suppliers. And what happened was there was lots and lots of stock ended up being thrown away as a result of which, because you grow this stuff, it's in a glass house, a protected crop, it's going to be ready when it's ready, regardless of whether the end customer wants it or not. So you ended up with this conveyor belt of stock coming through, and all of a sudden the retailers turned off the buy signals, and all that happened was this stock went into the bin. So the costs spiraled within the industry and went in the millions. The costs that were associated with this were up in the millions. So what we did is we got B&Q, head office, B&Q retailers, so the retail side of things, the actual garden centre themselves. We had representation there from the suppliers, and we had representation there from the couriers as well. And we got them all in a room together, and we mapped it out end to end, exactly what went on within this process. And what we found is that it was something like 16 days, I think it was, from stock out through to stock being delivered to stores. And what the buyers were saying is it's difficult for us to predict what the weather's going to do. And we can't control that. And because it's a 16-day buying window, what we're doing is we're trying to predict what the weather's going to do in 16 days. And obviously the weather can do absolute cartwheels in 16 days. So the challenge was, how can we get that, getting all that group of people together and mapping it out so everybody understood what each other did. The challenge was, how can we get that down to less than 5 days? Because if we can get it down to less than 5 days, we've got much more accurate weather forecasts that we can work from. We can predict more accurately what exact stock requirements we're going to need. So that was the challenge to this group of people. And quite often when you map it out like this, when you map out, this is every single stage of the process, all the way from the buyers and retailers and stock out, all the way through to the buyers, through the growers, through to distribution, and back to the retail chain itself. Quite often what you find is not everybody understands what each other's role is within the process, because they all work in isolation. So by getting everybody together in a room, all of a sudden people go, now I understand why you get upset, why you cancel your order at last minute. I didn't realise you had to sort of like do all these activities to get to this point. Or from a retailer point of view, the retailer goes, the growers go, now I understand why you get upset if I don't send in the right quality, because now I understand all the operations that you've got to do. And we actually took this group of people, actually walked them through each other's processes. So we actually visited all the suppliers, we visited the distributors, we went to B&Q head office, and we actually physically walked through the process to produce this process map so that, first of all, everybody understood what each other had to do. And on each of these Post-it notes, it's got written down the amount of time taken to do each step as well. So we knew exactly how long it took to do each step within the process. And then what we set the challenge to the group, to the team, was to identify all the problems, all the 7 wastes, and this is what the green and the pink Post-it notes are. What are all the 7 wastes they can identify within that process? And what are all the ideas they've got on what we can do to improve it? And then once we'd done that, the team actually then started to work together to think about what we could do to reduce down this lead time to less than 5 days. Because each of these have got a time on it, what we could then do is go back through the Post-it notes and cross out the ones that we think we could eliminate by doing the improvements. We knew the frequency in which we used that process, therefore we could calculate how much time was saved and how much cost was saved, and then we could actually work out how much cost was it going to take to implement that idea and whether it would pay itself back. So by having all these costs and all these times, you can then start to do your business case around, is it actually worthwhile doing this? Are we going to generate enough savings to actually make it worthwhile to do this particular improvement? So that's your classic value stream mapping, with the idea being that you eliminate the waste, and by eliminating the waste, what you do is you improve the flow of value, in this instance crop, through to the end customer, the end user, and you deliver it in a just-in-time basis. So this concept of pull, so you're delivering it exactly when the retailer wants it, rather than actually pushing it through to the retailer and lots of waste within the process itself. Also, most of the time these days we're actually applying this to office environments, or the B&Q head office environment in this instance. So the kind of things that the problems you had, production report, and this is typical, this isn't just B&Q, this is most businesses have got these wastes. Production reports that nobody reads, lots of validation checks, bottlenecks, uncontrolled documents. People get so fed up with how long it takes to get stuff through. What they start to do is start to bypass it and find fast-track routes. So they start to overcome the problems by fast-tracking things through the process, which then can cause other knock-on problems, and batching things together to try and get things through quickly. So that's the kind of waste that you typically see within an operation. What you tend to get in automotive, and I'm switching backwards and forwards in terms of sectors, is this kind of activity that I talked about, the process mapping where you'd have everybody in a room together. The whole supply, in Nissan, our role, I was in the supply chain predominantly, but our role was to compete against Toyota. So the whole supply chain competed against the whole Toyota supply chain. Whereas I think what you quite often get is quite adversarial relationships in UK industry. So you'll have a retailer effectively competing against the supplier, and you'll get this adversarial relationship going on. Whereas what we used to quite often get is the whole supply chain in a room together, all thinking about what we could do to reduce down lead time and what we could do to improve productivity to make the overall vehicle more cost effective. And I think that's possibly one of the things that's got to happen more within a wider, is that grown-up relationship in the true sense of the word as well, not just playing lip service to it and put it on a mission statement that sits in the back of the quality manual, actually regularly getting together and fully understanding each other's operation and fully understanding that if we do this, this causes you a problem, therefore we're going to think about how we don't have to do that again in the future. It's that level of collaboration and cooperation is required, I think, if it's going to be a truly successful business model, where everyone benefits. You can't have, it's like any negotiation, you can't just have one person benefit. Both parties have got to benefit from that particular negotiation. And this is the steps that you go through. Typically, if you're going to improve a supply chain, you're going to improve a process, these are the steps you go through. So the first thing is we produce that current state map using post-it notes. Second stage is you identify those wastes, those 7 wastes, or those information wastes. It's an office environment. And then you start to prioritise those wastes, and that's where you prioritise based on the cost benefit. So how much is it going to cost to implement? What's the benefit we get back? Is it worthwhile doing or not? So you prioritise based on the cost benefit to the supply chain. And then you start thinking about what does that process look like. So redesign process, starting again from a blank sheet of paper almost. If we had to redesign the process of the supply chain, what's the optimum way of doing it? So that's the third stage, and then you put together your action plan of how you're actually going to implement it and how you're going to start implementation. So that's the rough cut approach that you go through, and that could be a very, very small operation all the way through to a full supply chain. If any of you are interested and in Lean and want to train your staff yourselves up in Lean, there is government funding available that you can use. It's through the apprenticeship levy pot, basically. So any of the apprenticeship levy payers, you can use your apprenticeship levy pot. And essentially what you can do, this is what we've been doing with horticulture. So we've put something like about 200 people from horticulture through this. And really the idea being is to give skills, because it is, I think you've picked up on it, it's very straightforward. The Lean tools and techniques are not complex. They're very straightforward tools and techniques. So you can use this as a way of training people up in your own business to actually use these tools and techniques on a daily basis. And it's spread out over a 12-month period. It's essentially 6 days of training and goes into a bit more detail about the tools and techniques. But what it does at the same time, it gets them to do 2 improvement projects themselves. And the idea being those 2 improvement projects are going to save £35,000. So the qualification is awarded off them actually implementing something and actually generating savings for the business. Once they've achieved that, they've delivered the 2 projects, they get a national recognised qualification as well. So they get a level 2 qualification in Lean, basically. So if any of you are interested in that, through HDB, drop them an email and I can send you the details out if you're interested in that.